Good day. We will be talking about the sugar and starch industry. First, we will be talking about the brief background and history of the industry. Carbohydrates are one of the most important elements to include in our daily diet, since they give us enough energy to get us through the day. Carbohydrates are sugars that may be divided into two categories: simple and complicated or complex. The simple form of carbohydrate is also known as sugar, and the latter, that is complex form, is known as starch. Sucrose, the most common meaning of the word sugar, is a white, crystalline, solid disaccharide that is often added to foods to enhance their sweetness. First, let's talk about sugar. Sugar is a kind of carbohydrate that has a sweet flavor, as opposed to starch, which does not. Sugar provides energy to the human body and is readily absorbed, but too much of it can cause diabetes. This is why they also called sugar as instant boost of energy. Monosaccharides are simple sugars composed of single sugar molecules. Examples of these are glucose, fructose, and galactose, which we can see in the figure. Also, sugar is a kind of carbohydrate, which may be found in foods such as rice, bread, milk, beans, and potatoes. On the other hand, starch, the complex carbohydrate commonly known as starch, is broken down first, unlike for sugar, which is readily available, before being digested by the human body. Also, starch is a form of energy storage, which has two types, namely glycogen and fats. Some of the sources of starch are fruits, nuts, vegetables, whole grains, and others. Next, the history of the sugar and starch industry. Sugarcane is a tropical grass probably originated in Papua New Guinea. In the course of prehistory, its prominence is spread throughout the Pacific Islands, India, and being grown in China as well. In 500 BCE, people chewed the sugarcane raw to extract its sweetness, and not until later than 500 BCE, early refining methods were developed by India. It involves grinding or pounding the sugarcane in order to extract its juice, and then it is boiled down and dried in the sun to yield sugary solids. The 1390s saw the development of a better press, which doubled the juice obtained from sugarcane. This permitted economic expansion of sugar plantations. In 1493, Christopher Columbus stopped at La Gomera in the Canary Islands. Before leaving, the governor gave him cuttings of sugarcane, which became the first to reach the Americas. In the year 1625 to 750, the weight or the worth of sugar was determined in gold. However, prices declined slowly as production became multi-source. In 20th century, Cuba became the largest producer of sugar until the collapse of the Soviet Union, which took away their export market, which led to the collapse of the industry.
Starch and sugar industry is a fundamental factor, especially in the food industry, because of their major involvement in the preservation and production of a lot of food products. Starch has starch as its starting material for dextrins, hydrolysates, and other starch derivatives to be produced. Starches such as cornstarch are mostly used as an additive to food products since they are used as a thickener and a stabilizer. But there are also starches that are used in the production of sweeteners. The sugar industry includes the production, processing, and marketing of sugars such as saccharose and fructose that is then used in the food industry to produce sweetened beverages, fast food, and other sweetened foods. These are some of the major companies involved in the starch and sugar industry. First off is the Stadtlagerag, or an international company based in Germany that is committed in making the world a better place. This German company is considered as the leading sugar producer in the world that has global consumers in over 30 different countries around the world. They have more than 20,000 employees working on their 23 sugar factories, refineries, and one wheat starch plant found all over Europe. They offer their consumers a wide variety of sugar and starch products, such as raw materials like sugar beets, sugar canes, and they also produce products such as animal feed, starch, and sugary products. For the local limelight, a lot of Filipino households must be familiar with Victoria's Milling Company, especially with their refined sugars. This company has been in this industry for over a century already, and its roots are planted in Negros Occidental during the early 1900s. And during that time, it was among the earliest modern sugar mills in the Philippines. It was one of the major producers of raw and refined sugar here in the Philippines, with a 12.63 market share, the biggest share of refined sugar production here in the Philippines. Other manufacturers of sugar and starch produced here in the Philippines include CSCS.
Sugar industry. Sugar industry has a lot of products and byproducts produced. Their main purpose is to act as a sweetener, preservative, texture modifier, fermentation substrate, and flavoring agent. First is the raw sugar. Raw sugar could be defined as any cane sugar refined by a single crystallization process, retaining trace amounts of the original cane molasses. This type of sugar does not mean unrefined, unprocessed, or in its natural state sugar. They, in fact, go through a great deal of processing, but much less than white sugars. Liquid sugar. Liquid sugar is a sugar you consume in liquid form from beverages like sugar sweetened soda. It is created using a mixture of a liquid such as water mixed with white or brown sugar. However, this type of sugar also have a negative effects in our health, like increase in heart rate disease. Third is refined sugar. Refined sugars are typically added to foods and beverages to improve taste. They are considered empty calories because they contain virtually no vitamins, minerals, proteins, fats, fiber, or other beneficial compounds. In addition to being low in nutrients, these processed foods can be rich in salt and added fats, both of which can harm your health when consumed in high amounts. And lastly, sugar alcohols. Sugar alcohols are sweeteners that have about half the calories of the regular sugar. They occur naturally in certain fruits and vegetables, but some are man-made and are added to processed foods. Sugar alcohols also create a cooling sensation when used in large amounts, which will work well with mint flavors. While as for starch industry, the products produced were potato starch, corn starch, tapioca starch, and beef starch. First is the potato starch. Potato starch is a major component of dry matter in potato tissue. One of the main uses of potato starch is as a thickener in a variety of recipes because it absorbs water effectively. Second is corn starch. Corn starch is a white powdery substance used for many culinary, household, and industrial purposes. Cornstarch is prized for its thickening properties. It is composed of long chains of starch molecules which when heated in the presence of moisture will unravel and smell or swell. Tapioca starch. Tapioca starch is a starch extracted from tapioca root. It is sometimes referred to as tapioca flour. When eaten, tapioca takes longer for the body to break down into sugar when compared to other grains of carbohydrates. And lastly, pea starch. Pea starch is a rich source of amylose and this unique feature gives it a good thickening and gelling properties which are better than other commonly used starches. Furthermore, pea starch can be used as a building and thickening agent with good gelling, good texture regulating, as well as good expansion regulating properties in many food products like pasta and noodles.
For our first product in sugar industry, we have refined sugar. The production of refined sugar starts with raw sugar undergoing affination or the method of mingling raw sugar with a warm heavy syrup which removes the molasses coating from the sugar crystal. Next is melting, using hot water or sweet water for 25 to 30 minutes and maintain 75 degrees Celsius temperature in a sugar melter. Then clarification, or a method of removing impurities and eliminates the maximum color of melt. Then decolorization, a method of removing brightly colored organic impurities from the liquor. Next is crystallization and centrifuging. The decolorized liquor is feeding to first muscat, and syrup separated from this muscat is used as feed for a second boiling. Then drying and cooling. Wet sugar were conveyed to hoppers having hot and cold air arrangements maintaining less than 40 degrees Celsius. Lastly, sugar packaging. Sugar from beans is automatically weighed and filled in bags. For the input, we have raw sugar and affination liquor, and for byproducts, we have molasses. The production of powdered sugar starts with cleaning sugar. This will remove impurities or metal pieces from sugar using magnets. Then milling. Particle size reduction due to high mechanical stress is accompanied by temperature increase to about 50 degrees Celsius. Next is mixing. The pulverized sugar is mixed with the appropriate amount of starch and other
Now let's talk about the production of the products from the sugar and starch industry. Let's first start with maltodextrin. The production begins with the hydrolysis of starch with the use of acid or enzyme in order to convert the starch into smaller sugars. Then it is refined to remove impurities, which process may include filtration, centrifugation, carbon bleaching, and ion exchange. After refining, the liquid is evaporated at approximately 77% solid, or it was dried for about 5% moisture. Lastly, it undergoes spray drying to produce dry powder maltodextrin. Our inputs include starch. It can either be from potato, wheat, or corn. We also need acid like sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, or nitric acid, an enzyme like alpha amylase in order to perform the conversion or the hydrolysis of the starch. The byproduct is corn syrup, which is produced when the liquid or the slurry didn't undergo spray drying. Next is dextrose. The first step in the process is the liquefaction of the starch in a jet cooker. Then it will go through saccharification, which turns it into sugar with the use of enzyme. This process produces 94% dextrose. Now, this 94% dextrose can be further refined to produce 99% dextrose. Next, it will be evaporated at approximately 71% solids. Lastly, it will go through crystallization, where the liquid or the syrup is cooled carefully, forming dextrose monohydrate. Now, this product can be further processed by dissolving it in a hot purified water, which produces another type of dextrose, which is anhydrous dextrose. Similarly, inputs like starch and alpha amylase is needed for the production of dextrose. Our byproducts are corn gluten feed, potato pulp, and many more. So these byproducts are usually produced during the extraction of starch.
Let us now head on to the statistics for the sugar industry. Let us begin by analyzing the averages in the 20th century. So, in the 20th century, approximately 179.86 million tons of sugar is produced annually. With this, 171.8 million tons is consumed by the various industries which uses sugar. Getting the difference of these data gives us that the total sugar stock worldwide each year is 45.84 million tons. Now, let us analyze the total sugar production worldwide, starting from the year 2009 and 2010 to 2020 and 2021. So, looking at the graph, we can see that in the year 2009 and 2010, the total production of sugar reached 153.4 million metric tons. This increased slightly in the previous years as well as in the next year after that. And then the production of sugar stabilized in the next 3 years around 177 million metric tons. This trend maintained where the sugar production is kind of stable but with some fluctuations as we have seen. In the previous 3 years, the sugar production worldwide has been an increasing trend where last year, 2021, or this year actually, the total sugar production is estimated to be 185.4 million metric tons. So the leading producers of sugar in the 2020 to 2021 season is as stated in the pie chart below. So as we can see here, Brazil accounted for 29.61 million metric tons of sugar produced, which is actually 18.3% of the world production. This is followed by India with 16.9%, the European Union with 10.7%, and China with 6.4%, as well as other countries as you can see here. Now, the rest of the world, or the countries which are not listed in this graph, actually accounted for 24.5% of the total sugar production worldwide. Let us now analyze the world sugar consumption per capita. So in this graph, we can see the world sugar per capita consumption in terms of kilogram per capita per year in the year 2008 and 2013. So in this graph, we can see that South America is the world leading consumer of sugar, which makes sense since in the previous slide, we have seen that Brazil is the world's leading producer of sugar, which is actually located in South America. This is followed by Central America, which constitutes of the US and Mexico, and followed by Oceania, which is located in the Pacific. So we can see here that South America actually consumes close to approximately 47 kilogram per capita. Now let us analyze the sugar allocation per industry. So as we can see here, the bakery industry accounts for most of the sugar used. So this is followed by confectionery industry and the dairy industry. Now the other industries that are not mentioned here also account for a minuscule percent compared to the huge three industries, but then we cannot really opt them out. Let us now head on to the statistics for the starch industry. So several of the world's top 10 starch producers use tapioca as their main raw material. So the top 10 global starch producing countries by type of starch in the year 2008 to 2010 are as follows. So China accounted for the top producer at where their most produced starch is actually cornstarch. This is followed by Thailand, at which their most produced starch is cassava starch, followed by the EU and the US, where the US accounts for a large majority of the US starch is cornstarch. This is relevant in our next slide, where we can see that the starch production in the US actually is majorly dominated by the glucose syrup. Now, glucose syrup is actually derived from cornstarch. This makes sense since in the previous slide we've seen that the US actually produces a large majority of its starch, which is cornstarch. Now, the glucose syrup is followed by modified starch in terms of production, and this is followed by hydrolysates. So, in terms of the starch allocation per industry, a large majority of the produced starch is used in sugar. The next is used in medicine, followed by modified starch, the beer industry, and the chemical industry. This is followed by the food industry, paper making industry, and others. So as we can see in this graph, the total starch produced worldwide is actually allocated to starch sugar in the terms of 61%. So the medicine accounts for 6% of the world's starch production. This is followed by modified starch, which accounts for 6% of the world's total starch consumption.